I am live. Hello, good morning. It's Saturday. It's not morning anymore. I am reading out of So Moses Was Born. This is a book by Joan Grant. She was a prolific writer. She was born in 1907. She died 1989. And she was a wonderful writer. She wrote books of her far memory. And she very much was preoccupied with the subject of ethics. To her, the word ethic represented the fundamental and timeless codes of attitudes and behavior towards one another, on which the health of the individual and society depends. So this is the first dynasty of Egypt, I think. But anyway, no, this is not. Apparently, the first dynasty of Egypt once knew the code well, but lost it and found it. Anyway, here we are. Well, she is Nebunefer, who is the brother of Ramoses and the brother of Karadan. Ramoses is now Pharaoh. He is expecting a son to be his heir, and there has been a great searching for this. But we are here now. Ramoses are going to be with what he hopes is the mother of his heir, who is about to give birth. Her name is Habakkuk, and Ramoses actually did not know her name. I must have been more exhausted, that is Nebunefer's view. I must have been more exhausted than I realized, for I slept until dawn the following morning. Apu then presented me with the surprising news which I had just attempted to describe, adding that, disguised as mercenaries, we were to meet Ramoses at a door in the boundary wall of the royal residence, an hour before sunset. I will not trouble to tell you of the interminable discussions which took place between Karadan, Pempi, his wife, and me during the day. Undoubtedly, Ramoses was behaving in a manner which seemed entirely out of character. But when Pharaoh had spoken, it was useless to do anything save obey. We were early at the rendezvous, but Ramoses was already waiting for us. Apu had warned us that my brother was trying to learn to be ordinary. But I was still amazed when the boy addressed him as Ramoses and offered him a handful of melon seeds, which he not only chewed with apparent enjoyment, but laughed when Apu spat husks at a chariot, which passed too close and bespattered us with mud. Earlier in the day there had been heavy rain, and the scent of bean fields was strong in the air. Water still lay in the ruts of the track we followed, and the thongs of the shabby sandals which Apu had obtained for me from one of the gardeners began to chafe my toes. We came to the road which led only to the Hebrew village, and in the rising wind the leaves of a solitary palm rattled like arrows in a half-empty quiver. A span of oxen plodded towards us, the cart shrill with ungreased axles. "It is the 7th day when food is given to the Hebrews," said Apu. "I was there when they began the distribution this afternoon. Habakkuk's aunt received 5 handfuls of millet, and the fish had been too long from the water." A gong boomed through the dusk, and Ramoses quickened his pace. "We need not hurry," said Apu, "for though that it is the signal for the gates to be closed, we, being Egyptians, shall not have to pay the fine of 5 utens to enter." "Fine? What fine?" said Ramoses. 5 utens, or 5 lashes, to any Hebrew who is not inside the village before the sunset gong. Foreigners have to bribe the guards with 10 utus or more." "Who but Hebrews and their guards enter the village?" "Anyone who prefers to buy many hours' work by a skilled craftsman for a few eggs or a piece of goat's flesh, rather than pay a fair price in the marketplace." "But it is the law, my law, that Egyptians shall not mix with Hebrews. Apu remained unabashed. Then Pharaoh is well served by disobedience, or we should have had to darken our fat faces with soot and hope to be mistaken for Nubians. If Ramoses had any doubts as to the efficacy of our disguise, they must have been dispelled by the ease with which we were allowed to pass the gate. The 3 guards were cooking their evening meal over a brazier and gave us no more than a cursory glance before signalling us on with a jerk of the thumb. "The lack of discipline is disgraceful," muttered Ramoses, but fortunately too low to be overheard. Inside the gate there was an open space where a stall under a tattered awning still displayed a few wilting vegetables. In the light of a pottery lamp, which burned with the acrid smell of rancid fat, cabbage had the harsh green of verdigris, and flies crawled in the yellow slime of broken pumpkin. An old man, his beard white as bone against the dark draggle of his robe, held out a bunch of carrots, then turned to spit in the dust, seeing we were Egyptians. We entered a narrow alley, a cleft between the hovels, which seemed to press towards each other as though gasping for air, where other, even narrower alleys intersected the one we followed. Tall jars of glazed pottery added their stench to the pervading decay. "Are they too idle even to dig cesspits?" said Ramoses angrily. "Not too idle, but too poor," said Apu. "Urine is valuable. It is used to clean grease from clothes and also in dyeing wood." "They have not even the decency of swine, and yet I treat them as though they were honourable prisoners taken in war. Caradan should come here, and then he would cease to plague me for the greater clemency to Hebrews." The sound of hammer on metal bored into hearing, like an arrowhead grating on bone. We paused outside a small yard, where a man whose greasy hair hung in ringlets to his shoulders was beating the blade of a dagger on a stone avil. Beside him, a boy was blowing a brazier to fierce heat through a hollow reed. "They are fine coppersmiths," said Apu. "Several of the royal bodyguard carry Hebrew daggers. And if it were not for Pharaoh, they would wear Hebrew daggers between their ribs." The Hebrew boy thrust the blade into the glowing heat with a pair of tongs, then into a jar of water, where it hissed like an angry cobra. Ramoses grasped my arm and hurried me on. "Neb, will Horus understand that it was only through ignorance that I allowed his son to endure such squalor? Even the souls of pharaohs have to visit the underworld for instructions by Anubis." "Thank you for reminding me of that, Neb." He squared his shoulders. "My son will confound the priesthood of Amun-Ra, because he will find it so easy to pass the 7 great ordeals, having already conquered this hell while still unborn." He paused to stare into a room that was below the level of the street, which had risen through generations of dust and refuse. "Neb, hell must be very similar to this village, dark and full of hatred, crowded with Egypt's enemies." His remark seemed inappropriate, for the sole occupant of the room was a girl who was rubbing oil into her hands, which were swollen and reddish red. "What's wrong with her hands?" "With her hands, Neb?" I thought he was moved by pity, until he betrayed his personal anxiety by exclaiming, "Is there a pestilence here?" "She's only a linen weaver," I said. "Fine linen is woven under water, for the thread is brittle. The skin soon becomes affected, but the finer the linen, the higher the price." "The greed of Hebrews passes belief. The disease is not infectious?" "You need not have to distress yourself, dear brother. The ladies of the court can continue to wear mist linen without anxiety as to its origin." 3 steps led down to the door of a wine shop. "You must wait for me there," said Apu. "It will be better if you do not see Habaka until I have spoken with her aunt." As we entered, 2 old men who had been sitting at a garbage board at a gaming board, stared at us, and then carefully put away the pieces in a cloth bag. 3 soldiers, more than a little drunk, were sprawling on a bench against the wall. They looked at us with suspicion, then, satisfied that we were also Egyptians, called for more beer. A crone shuffled forward, her eyes bright with cupidity. She led us to an alcove and wiped the greasy table with a dirty cloth. I told her to bring the best wine, and she hobbled away to return with a stone jug and 2 cups. When she had left us, Moses whispered, "Surely we need only pretend to drink here. The place is filthy, and we might catch some disgusting foreign disease." An argument began between the old woman and the 3 men in the outer room. She returned holding a gold pin in her clawed hand. "It looks like one of my soldiers' cloakspins," said Moses. "Did she steal it?" "Only through barter, in which, as you know, these people are highly skilled." Pempi told me they were starving. I almost believed her. His forehead glistened with sweat. Suddenly he said hoarsely, "Neb, I've changed my mind. I cannot see my son born in such squalor. I will send Ptolemus to you, but I must leave this accursed village." "You cannot run away. Apu has told Habakkuk that you hope to be with her before the child is born. If she is disappointed, the child may be born dead." "The other children lived." "None of their mothers loved you, Moses, at the well of the 3 sycamores. I said that one day a woman would love you. Are you afraid of love?" "Yes, Neb, but I was afraid then too." Abu stood beckoning in the doorway. I threw 10 Newtons on the table, and the soldiers stared at us without a glimmer of recognition as we passed. The aunt was waiting for us in the street. Although no one could have mistaken her for an Egyptian, her eyes had a horrid likeness to Tua's. In her nailed hand she clutched a gold amulet. "So the father of my niece's shame returns to pay gold for his bastard." She gave an obscene chuckle. "If she dies, you must give me more gold, twice as much gold. But you can fling your spawn alive on a dunghill." Moses pulled the latch string, and the door to which Abu had led us swung open slowly. Steps led down to a room where a small lamp flickered against the shadows. A girl was sitting on a bed in the far corner. When she saw Moses, she covered her eyes with her hand and said, "Don't let me wake up. Oh, please, my love, keep me asleep with you." "I am real, Habakkuk," said Moses. She let her hands fall to her side, but still dared not look at him. "I can hear you. I've never been able to hear you before in my dreams," she whispered. "I'm not a dream." His voice was low and caressing, as though he were soothing a shy gazelle. He put his hand very gently on her bowed head. She looked up at him, and suddenly her eyes were luminous with incredulous joy. "Oh, my love, oh, my dear, dear love." I think neither of them heard the door close behind me. "There's a sickle-shaped scar above her right eyebrow," said Apu, "so I'm sure the baby will have the leaf mark on his ankle. Now that I've seen them together, I know that our prayers will be answered." "We will know long before sunset or so," the aunt told me, said Apu. "I've put water to heat on the brazier. The bed covers are clean." Why did she think Moses was only a dream? Apu looked a little embarrassed. "Because I forbade the aunt to let her know he was coming. You see, I was afraid that he might run away when he saw where she lived." He hesitated. "Ned, will you promise never to let him know? I thought he might be too frightened to stay." "I shall never tell him. None of us must ever show that we realize how difficult it is for him to be ordinary." "Was it difficult for you, Neb?" I smiled. "So difficult that I nearly died in the process." "I thought it must have been, or you would have not been so patient with people who seem so slow to learn." He pointed to a pile of rotting rinds that scurried with rats. I should not find it easy to be patient with Hebrews. Are all foreigners so dirty? Some of them are, and so are some Egyptians. If you had been Pharaoh, all Egypt would be like the living waters, he said loyally. No, Apu, had I been Pharaoh, a Hittite might now rule Egypt. Neb, I suddenly understand why Ramoses is so different from all of us, why he has to pretend he is almost a god. I think that if you believe in something enough, it must always come true. Ramoses believes he is unconquerable, and so the two lands are safe with him. And what do Hebrews believe? I don't know, do you? Perhaps they will live in villages like this, and they forget they are Hebrews, and remember they are only people like everyone else. I heard Ramoses call my name, and his voice was urgent. He was sitting on the low bed with his back against the wall. Between his knees sat Habakkuk, leaning against him and supported by his arms. I think he will be born very soon, she said. She turned her head to kiss Ramoses. You're quite sure, my love, that do you not mind seeing it being born? Of course I'm not afraid. His voice reminded me of the boy who thought he spoke to the ghost of his father in the royal tomb. He glanced at me and then said rather too loudly, how could we be afraid of seeing a child born in love? She pointed to a rush blanket lined with pieces of clean woolen cloth and carefully patched linen that was raised from the floor on 4 glazed bricks. I made this cradle myself from reeds cut in the marshes. My people are forbidden to cut reeds, but I thought they would remind him of the happy place where his body began. She gasped and leaned forwards, clutching Ramoses' arm. I hastily sat cross-legged on the floor in front of her, thanking all the gods that I had learned to at least a little from Patamas. The bricks which raised the cradle out of reach of rats and beetles, were given to me by the potter's wife. She's not a very nice woman, for I had to wash clothes for her for much longer than she said I need to in payment. Don't try to talk, my love, said Ramoses, who looked as though he were riven by a sharper pain even than she suffered. I like talking because I'm not very comfortable and don't want to think about it. A damp stain slowly widened across the blue coverlet, and clear fluid dropped to the floor. The Nile is rising, she said, and managed to smile. Silent was urgent as drums on the horizon. I think he is being born now. Into my hands came the warm, moist head of the child. She gave a little cry, sharp as a copper blade, as I drew him forth from her body. It is a son, I said. She leant back into the arms of Ramoses. Since he began, I knew he was a son, she said. As I severed the cord which gleamed like silver in the lamplight, he cried lustily, thrusting strongly with his legs. On the right ankle there was a red mark, shaped like a leaf. Thank you, Sensen, I whispered. Thank you, my dear, dear love. I put the son of Horus in his cradle while I attended to his mother, with gratitude to Patamas for having shown me exactly what I must do. Suddenly I heard Ramoses whisper, Don't move, Nap, don't move. His eyes, wide with terror, stared over my shoulder at something behind me. Very slowly I turned my head. Above the cradle a cobra swayed, its hood glinting red gold in the glow from the brazier. Its head weaved majestically from side to side like the feathers of the fan-bearers of Pharaoh. Had it come to strike or to shield, to honor or to destroy? The child waved his small fist in the air. The royal snake seemed to bow its head, then slid to the floor and glided into the shadows. That was the end of The Son of Horus. Have a good Saturday.